I mix what I like, what I like.
I mix what I like is exactly where you want and need to be. I mix what I like, organic, vegan, soul food from your immediate diet. Live healthy.
I mix what I like, what I like.
We're here on I Mix What I Like. You may check us out on imixwhatilike.org, where you can see all these other shows and what my daddy likes and other cool things.
Yes, yes, yes. What's up, world? Welcome to this special edition of I Mix What I Like. I'm Jared Ball, very happy to be your host. Good Monday morning to you. Happy Black August, or salute to those commemorating Black August and who created the tradition. Welcome to those coming on in. Greetings, DC Joe Black. Syrup with the appropriate Jonathan Jackson. What's up, good people? Please do like, share, subscribe. We're only 2 more days away from this demonetized wilderness state. But financial or otherwise, material or otherwise, we do appreciate your support. So please do like, share, subscribe, comment, put this in your socials, invite others to join you. I'm very excited to have this discussion. Shout out to Chidi Macha, who most recently called this into being. And I do think it's a great way for at least me to commemorate and support commemorations of Black August and related politics. What's up, Poncho? Peace, peace, peace. So yeah, so got a number of things to get to today. My goal is to actually get through the entire book, but there's no particular rush, and got a little bit of time today. And depending on where you all are with comments, questions, queries, conundrums, catechisms, cacophony, calumny, consternation, condemnation, contemplation, you know. What's up, Anthony? Peace, 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 peace. Yeah, so what I thought, I went and found, what's up, Kai? I went and found what I thought would be a good place for us to start. I think, big bro in the building, what I think was my first attempt at a YouTube video creation in relation to the project, but specifically very happy to be talking about, again, this book here, I Mix What I Like, a Mixtape Manifesto, written intentionally. So yesterday, big shout out to Skip Coon. Please, if you haven't, check out the quick jab interview put together yesterday to talk about Skip Coon's new album, August, which I do think is anthemic as it relates to Black August. And it's a phenomenal album. It does make it easier, since he works with us around here, and Diallo in particular, that it is that good. I would hate to have to be this involved with working with someone if I really didn't feel that way about the art. But the album is phenomenal. And he said something in that interview that spoke to me, because he said something about wanting to create art. And the reason he said he likes to keep the album length shorter is because, he puts it better than I'm remembering it, but because it's designed to get you to move. He wants you not to get too lost in the breadth and scope of a longer project. He wants people to be moving and acting in response, and it's an actionable album. Well, I used to say that about this book, and for all of its flaws, and I went back and revisited them for this discussion, and there are many. For all of its flaws, this is my favorite project. This is if I had written this book the way it should be written, I may have never endeavored to write another thing, because this is really my as one of my daughters likes to say, my heart. This is my heart right here. And I had in mind, I thought with intention that it would be kept small, that it would be published in paperback on an underground or Black-owned press, and it would be in people's pockets when they were out becoming actionable. So and Skip is referenced in this book. So the overlap is there. So okay. And you can get, as is linked in the show description, you can get your free digital copy of the book. Yeah, I mean, it's been time to remix the book. I should rewrite it. I should have been rewritten it. I mean, the reality is I'm not that guy. I'm not disciplined like that. I'm not, this book chapter I'm supposed to be writing now, I'm struggling so much I'm just not that guy. So, but that's really it. I mean, there's really no other. Yeah, I mean, there should be. And as we'll talk about today, there would be good reason for there to be an updated edition. It would have to be told in terms of the mixtape, more in terms of history. And as we'll get to a little bit, I was late even in developing the project that the book really evolves out of. But so what I was writing it more with the idea that I was on the way to getting a PhD, because it was initially my dissertation, that I would be writing the manifesto, but the call for others to be doing the same thing, like as an extant contemporary project. And so a rewrite would have to talk a bit more in terms of the history of the mixtape, which is, we'll talk a little bit about, would be valuable, because people still, I think, get it wrong and miss all the most important parts of the history. And it would have to just be more, it would just have to be organized better. And then there would have to be some corrections made. Now, again, in the link in the show description, there is on the page, there's a summary, and we'll get to it a little bit later, but there's a summary of the initial errors that I had wanted to address. But there's another glaring one that I found in preparing for today. And this is another reason why I didn't want to, there's some trauma involved in terms of my relationship to the work and to the time and to the people and to so it was, but I do, this is, so, okay. So what I did dig up was, so to introduce some and remind others of what I was ultimately talking about. I want to say, I'm tempted to say, go easy on me in the comments.
Phrasing.
Yeah, we're doing that now. Check EYL on Friday for more on that. But let's just go. So let's start. This is the FreeMixRadio project that again was my favorite thing to do, but is what is ultimately written about in the book. So here we go.
FreeMix Radio.
When worse come to worse, my peoples come first. My peoples come first.
FreeMix Radio.
What's up, world? I am Jared Ball, the Funkinest journalist, founder, creator, and producer of FreeMixRadio, the original mixtape radio show. Often enough, when I am passing out FreeMix mixtapes, teaching or discussing mixtape radio, people ask why we do what we do and how. So we thought a quick video demonstration of both the why and how was in order, and to that end, welcome to the Liberated Masses Media basement studio of Second Childhood Productions in Washington, D.C., the birthplace and origin of FreeMixRadio, the original mixtape radio show. Let me again say from the outset that FreeMixRadio is an actual mixtape distributed freely in and around Washington, D.C., but also other parts of the country and world. We are continuing the traditions of the rap music mixtape, emancipatory journalism, and black radical underground communication and radio. Our goal is to make the mixtape a 21st century version of David Walker's Appeal or Robert and Mabel Williams' Radio Free Dixie and the many other forms of radical journalism whose goal was and is the provision of necessary information and culture to inspire, encourage, and even direct political struggle. For a more detailed explanation of all this, feel free to visit voxunion.com, where you can pick up a copy of the first academic study of the mixtape as emancipatory journalism. In short, with FreeMixRadio, the mixtape actually becomes the airwaves of sorts used to convey the kinds of journalism and culture that commercial outlets cannot offer. This is done because we recognize that, as in all societies, dominant media work for the dominant, and that the media system of today in the United States is the most powerful and all-pervasive system in human history. That means fewer people are able to control more of what we see, read, and hear, all of which leads to their ability to constrain our consciousness and ultimately our behavior. In terms of hip-hop and all music in general, 4 companies own and distribute roughly 95% of all the music in the Western world. As of July 21st, 2006, Sony BMG is looking to sell its music division, possibly to Universal or EMI, which is itself looking to merge with Time Warner, meaning that we may soon be down to 2 companies with this kind of control. So in what Greg Palast has called a musical OPEC, these companies are able, through the practices of payola or pay for play, playlist construction, and consolidated radio ownership, to determine who gets heard and who does not. The average at this point is $1,000 per song per station to get music onto those playlists, and the kind of heavy rotation they need to impose their tastes on us. This is how we end up going from not liking a song to loving it through simple repetition and play, and we end up saying that the song has grown on us when in fact it has been imposed. Of the many efforts at media reform, few argue for the actual establishment of a low-tech underground alternative press, as we do here with FreeMixRadio. When already 40% of the country has no high-speed internet access, or more than that in Black and Latin America, or when media giants are lobbying Congress to end net neutrality, making the internet more expensive and therefore more exclusive, we are fast approaching a time when even that medium is far less free than today, when it is already proven not to be a viable solution to the media needs of the Black, Latin, or poor population. This, in short, is why we began FreeMixRadio in 2004. The mixtape, until now long ignored in hip-hop and media studies, and which has been an underground communicative force in hip-hop since the beginning, may also be the best hope for the 21st century underground press. That is the why, and now here is how. The first issue when considering mixtape radio is the collection of the audio content. Using a mini disc recorder, CD turntables, an M-Box mixer, Apple laptop, Sound Studio 3 audio editing software, cassette and VCR TV inputs, and an external hard drive, I import all sound and music for editing onto my Apple laptop. I use a mini disc recorder and mic to collect audio and interviews from events, which allows me easily to collect strong quality audio. I then use the software and turntables to import music, mix, and do my best to set a high quality audio file ready for burning to CD. I complete one version for the web and another which is broken into tracks for easy navigation on the CD itself. From there, I take the initial burned copy and mass duplicate it using this Reflex Pro 7 burner. I visit computer market shows to buy in bulk to keep costs down, as we are a very small outfit with little funds. Buying in bulk allows us to keep the cost to roughly $20 per 100 copies burned, labeled, and sleeved, ready for delivery. From there, we begin the most difficult process, that of distribution. We use local barbershops, cafes, and a lot of hand-to-hand in the street distribution to get them out. Some have sent away for copies to distribute where they are around the globe, and we encourage that kind of support. But it is also our intention to encourage the development of mixtape radio shows wherever you are as part of a larger struggle for media and political freedom. Those like us who are discouraged by the current trend or direction in which hip-hop or journalism is moving need to realize that this is by design and must match our efforts to change the structure with efforts at providing outlets for the kind of news and music we need or want to hear. So in short, that's it. I hope that helps. Feel free to contact us for more information on Mixtape Radio and specifically FreeMix Radio, the original mixtape radio show. The mixtape is freedom. Get yours, burn it, and pass it along. In the words of George Jackson, no revolution is possible without a mass press for the people. And like Fred Hampton used to say, to you we say peace if you're willing to fight for it. All right. So that was it. That was the project. Yeah, vintage technology. Yeah. My voice is different, I'm sure. And then somebody, yeah, more like if fat jacked, as I think they say. So, but okay, so that's what I was at least trying to do, and we had actually been a couple years earlier. The idea coming out of shout out to organized community of united people, who it was really with them that the mixtape being used to build organization started to evolve, and then developed into that sort of full-blown project. But with that, I can at least say, you know, folks are at least clear what the goal was. It was at least a decade late, I think, as a project. The internet, the oversaturation evolution of the internet changed the game. A lot of things were changing. Venues, gentrification, venues being shut down, where distribution would have been more easily done, particularly record stores, and things of that nature. And then, to be fair, I was never a real DJ per se, so a lot of the quality of the mixes and the quality of the art never really hit the level that I think it should have. Shout out to DJ Underdog, who did DJ one of the editions years ago and showed where it should have been. But and shout out to DJ RBI, who created the first logo that you saw there with the fist and the radio tower as the arm and the CD as the bass. That was dope. And shout out to everybody who you know. So, all right. With that, I think we can let me just make this slight adjustment here. We can move to actually talking about the book itself, which again, you can get your copy at the link in the show description if you ever want to just actually read it or review some of the footnotes or whatever. And then what I thought we would do is just go through, my plan is to read the epigraphs from each chapter and go through some of the notes and talk a little bit about the intent and the goals. And then if I catch questions as I'm going through, I'm happy to answer them. Otherwise, we'll try to come back and do a specific Q&A period, discussion period, and go from there. All right. So again, in another video, I talk more about some of the issues that'll get repeated here, but in terms of the history of the book, the background, some of the struggles with publication and all of that, I'm gonna hold on repeating any of that for now. I don't know if it'll come up later, but essentially the book emanated from my PhD dissertation, which was itself an attempt to explain sort of the logic behind the project, the FreeMixRadio project we were just looking at there. I Mix What I Like is an homage to Biko. This is one of the big errors in the book that I cringe every time I come back to it. But it's just there. Shout out to Natsu Taylor Saito, to Ali Johnson, Diedrich Muhammad, Claude Marks, Mark Bolden, Shaheen Arifdeen, Carlos McBride, Greg Thomas, and my man Headrock all wrote some nice blurbs. Todd Stephen Burrows, Frank Wilderson, Glenn Ford on the back blurb the book. And I appreciated my little tribute here. Por mis niñas, Maisie Marley, no hay razón más grande para luchar. There is no other, greater reasons for which to fight. My two daughters. Acknowledgements to primarily the DC area community, who hip hop community and activist community, who out of which this effort evolved. So Organized Coup, Malcolm X Grassroots Movement, the Fanon Project, and a number of other folks that I was shouting out in those acknowledgements. In this prefatory note to the reader, so as I said, I'm going to read the epigraphs at least, just to sort of set the tone for each chapter. But I pledge allegiance to the mixtape DJs of the world, DJ Jazzy Joyce. DJs, producers, journalists, mixtapers of the world unite. The Funkinest Journalists, which was the moniker I used to use when we were doing underground radio in DC, and I was fortunate to link up with Radio CPR and that existing collective and do pirate radio. So I went under the moniker the Funkinest Journalist. And at one point I wanted to do turned tables, as in we're turning the tables on them on the yeah. And then what does not kill us is an opportunity to organize. Parisa Nuruzi of Empower DC, an activist in DC. And then, as I said, the book is an homage to Steve Biko with this tremendous spelling error of his name. And it's just bad. It's just a bad error. And it's just a very humbling error. So as much as I'm critical of others, it's just a reminder that, don't do too much. But the point was that he wrote, I write what I like, and I wanted the mixtape to be what I wanted to apply the Black consciousness and emancipatory journalism work that Biko was doing in writing to the mixtape. And shout out to Dr. Haight, who really first made that link for me. I write what I like to I mix what I like. And that has evolved over the last however many years to my quote unquote brand. But yeah, that's really what the point was. And then just to begin to talk a little bit about why I'm going to be talking about colonization. And it was my attempt really at the time, again, foolish as it may have been, it was an honest attempt, what I thought would have evolved into this grand argument as to why Black materialists and African-centered or Afrocentrists could find common ground. So that's why in the book there's so many references to African-centered work and to Marxist tradition, the Marxist tradition, because to this day I still see an important overlap. The popular version that's promoted around African-centered thought is bastardized as the popular version of discussions of Marx and socialism. And underneath, I think that somebody maybe more competent, more dedicated, more disciplined than me could have made this argument that I think is there, that when I read Marx and the Marxist tradition, I'm reading an attempt to explain the universe through the context of a very specific Eurocentric lens that at its core has too much overlapping similarity with what I think is being said in the African-centered traditions from an African-centered perspective. And I think that the beef as it is too much, and there's too much overlap. So this was my attempt, and I thought that the internal colonialism theory or theoretical approach could synthesize that contradiction. Now, I may be wrong. I may have just not been competent or able to complete it, but that was what my goal here was. So that's why when the book first came out, there was a good amount of criticism from both sides, to the extent that anybody paid it attention. But that was sort of, on the one hand, I got called out as being Eurocentric for referencing Marx, and I also got called out for being an anti-materialist for referencing, as I did here, traditions of good speech, Medu Netter, and so on and so forth, which I still think is important. But that was at least the point. So what I tried to say here in referencing Du Bois was a point that I did like, that saying that, well, I wrote here, one's ability to truly hear unconventional ideas requires first a recognition that a people's observable conditions are the result of imposed processes rather than their own inherent flaws. So this is something I still think is an issue. It's an issue that comes up in the buying power and Black capitalism debate and argument, that there is still this idea that inequality exists because of some inherent flaws. I said, just when we were just at that conference in Alabama over the summer, that preacher said that Black people, he said, we are, how did he phrase it? But it was a cultural deficiency. So maybe not inherently biologically, but culturally. And I'm like, no, there are imposed processes. So that I think is important to first accept. I think there's still a hesitance, an imposed. We are discouraged from thinking that way. And to see that, oh, if we just circulate our dollar, if we just do a little bit this, if we work harder, if we would get a better degree, if we change. And the change that we need to make is just organizing around some very radical ideas. And that's not so that's what I was just trying to, and that's why I concluded it by saying, Amen, rather Amen Ra was, like a little, so again, some of the trauma in revisiting this is right here on the first page in the introduction. I was live and present, speaking of African-centered thought, at I believe it was an ASCAC, Association for the Study of Classical African Civilizations conference in Philadelphia. I think Dr. Haight was with me, and it was the one time I got to see and meet the late Dr. Asa Hilliard in person. And Dr. Greg Carr gave this very rousing speech that I clipped and put in my intro here, because it still resonates. But I think there has evolved an even more Black layer performing this same function. But as he says here, people will not challenge us. They must treat us with silence. I just think this is so watch who people quote when it comes to Black scholarship. If they're quoted, forget them. If they are considered the most compelling, the most brilliant, what you see then is someone that does not help us. It is the invisible. It is the ones that we know, the ones that do not receive grants, the ones that are not lauded or called superheroes in each other's books, or worse still, the ones who are not considered the best by white scholars who stand over our archives like vultures, keeping our history hostage and asking us as the price of admission that you trade your soul for access to the things that your ancestors inscribed. God damn. I mean, he was killing it. And his delivery, I'm not doing it justice here either. Those people that write on the backs of books that this is the finest new scholar, that is the person you should never quote. Rather, buy all their books, read them for their sources, get the sources yourself, because what they have contributed is not a frame for interpreting, but rather they have just given you a roadmap to the things that you need to reclaim. Greg Camathy Carr. I mean, say what wherever we are. I mean,
Now listen, that's called my boy. You know nothing about that.
That is bars. Dr. Clark, John Henry Clark, to talk about the subject, I'm going to talk around the subject. And then complacency is far more dangerous. Complacency is a far more dangerous attitude than outrage. My approach was and remains unabashedly confrontational. Ward Churchill. I love that line too. Yeah. So the introduction goes from there, and just to talk a little bit about some of the street vendors that I would interact with back in the day in DC, and talk with a little bit about the business of bootlegging and distribution of CDs, the harassment they suffered, and to just sort of introduce the reader to what I was trying to do was introduce the reader to the word that comes to mind right now is intimacy, the intimate relationship that not only mixtapes, but the underground so-called economy, street corner vending, had has, I don't know to what extent it does anymore, to certain communities, the colonized in particular, and to introduce the reader to some of what the vendors go through, and to introduce the readers to some of the context that we can expose and critique from looking at that. And what I was just ultimately trying to say is that as it says here, power is ultimately an issue, and control over media, primarily at the point of distribution or promotion, is essential. But as important as this fact is, most ignore the basic relationship of media to power, and power, whatever its nature today, includes a crucial media component. So that's what I was ultimately just trying to say. Or introduce as what I would be trying to say about the relationship of the mixtape and the underground communicative economy, so to speak, to internally colonized communities, and what it means in terms of the power relationships in creating those internal colonies. And then I did use this example of Arnold Schwarzenegger signing off on the death warrant to Tukey Williams, where he acknowledges that the issue is less about Tukey's crimes and more about his political recalcitrance in dedicating a book to Mandela, Angela Davis, Malcolm X, Assata Shakur, Geronimo Pratt, Ramona Africa, John Africa, Leonard Peltier, Dhoruba Al-Mujahid, George Jackson, Mumia Abu-Jamal, who just turned 70 yesterday, happy birthday, and countless other men, women, and youth who have to endure the hellish oppression of living behind bars. Schwarzenegger said this is evidence that Tukey should be killed. And my point was that we need to be weary of how those in power view the distribution of ideas and what kinds of ideas and what they think should be done to those who distribute those ideas. So I was absolutely trying to make the point that the reason to shut down unsanctioned communication, the mixtape economy, was not about copyright protection or the protection of artists or whatever. It was about the suppression of any attempt among the colonized to communicate without the authority and even the surveillance of those in power. And once you do break that law, this I do take as evidence of what the state is willing to do. So it was in that context that I wanted to talk in the book about the mixtape, internal colonialism, et cetera, and so forth. So she's now passed on, the late Catherine McAdams, Dr. Catherine McAdams, one of the two, with Maureen Beasley, two Southern white women at the College of Journalism at the University of Maryland, who's, the way I think of it, who's suffering at the hands of patriarchy, for them, led them to, if not full solidarity, a willingness to be supportive for the cultivation of other, not only groups and people, but unconventional ideas. This is not to say that either one of them fully supported my argument or loved my argument, but they loved the idea. What I think they loved most was the idea that anyone would come through the program and try to upset white men as much as I was. I think they were so, not bitter, but they had suffered a lot at the hands of white men going through their professional journalism careers, that by the time people like me and Dr. Burroughs before me got there, they were like, you know what? I may not understand or be, whatever with Jared, but look how angry he makes my enemies. So, but the two models I tried to develop for the work evolved because Dr. McAdams basically said, we need them. We need to see them. So this was, again, I talk more about it in the 10th anniversary video about the book. I'm wildly proud of what I was attempting here, but there's so many errors and flaws with the delivery. And this was another one of them I was hoping would have been cleaned up with some help, but it just never got there. So the pyramid, it's not so much that it's wrong, it's that I just think design, explanation, it just could have been better. But the point I was just trying to make was building off of what Albert Memmi had talked about in terms of the colonial pyramid, to try to show how I was using it here in the, and look at what I'm just noticing. This is hilarious. I didn't even notice this. But I have here, just under the ruling elite, the leisure class. And as much fun as we poke at earn your leisure, this is perfect. But the point was that all of this in this society is based on enslavement and the colonization, the genocide of the so-called fourth world or indigenous population. And it's from the lands of the indigenous, the the natural resources taken over, the free labor of the enslaved African community, and not just the free labor, but the cultural production. Because as we'll talk a little bit about later, all of this country's popular culture emanates from other communities, so to speak, and primarily from Black communities, from the enslaved and colonized African community in this country, has produced pop culture, and still does drive what is considered popular. So it's they who form the basis. I have prisons and prison labor, the function that they play, not just in producing material wealth, but in what ultimately, what I would have referenced then, had I obviously hadn't known it, had it been produced, would have been what Ori is talking about in terms of what prisons do to manage immaterially society. Workers of all backgrounds. And one of the arguments, I mentioned Michael Hudson the other day and was critical of his critique of identity politics. But one thing that I do agree with that he said was that and as I'll describe it, the neoliberal form of identity politics has erased many groups' self-identity, recognizing their self-identity as incorporating, if not fully in embodying labor or workers. And we forget how many of us are workers and what that means in terms of class and other relations in a colony. Then there's the leisure class that ultimately gets to live off of that. And then there's the ruling elite, the 1/10 of 1% that have all of the wealth. So in terms of the epigraphs here, in the 15th and 16th centuries, Europe not only began to colonize most of the world, but also instituted a systematic colonization of information about the world. John Henrik Clarke. By 19th century's end, the Western European will to know had consolidated in the expansionist exploration and attempted colonization of the globe, Gloria Sandoval. And the ghetto might as well be the Gaza Strip. Black thought of the roots. Still prescient and present, unfortunately, to this day. But just the recognition as I think I talk more about it in a separate article, but part of the reference there is that that one of the beautiful, and James Spady's work talked about this, that the beauty of the underground communication and hip hop and the mixtape tradition that was pervasive incorporated a lot of internationalism and a lot of, more than people maybe remember or are encouraged to remember to this day, of recognition of the relationship of Black and brown communities to each other here in the United States, but also to other colonized communities around the world. So when we see today sort of a more enhanced, overt form of the condemnation of that idea, but it's still prevalent. So this is just me trying to talk more about internal colonialism, and this is again revisiting it. I'm overwhelmingly critical of the it's like A for effort, and I don't know what I would grade this for delivery, but it's not, it needed more work. Organizing the argument, arranging the argument, I just think it needed more work. The argument is correct, but it needed more work. And I was just trying to find ways of, and what I was attempting to do was to, which is odd, and is to take what I had done in the dissertation and make a more popular version of it. Because a lot of what I had to do for the dissertation was explain, well, how are you going to talk about Black people as a colony? And why would you talk about Black people as a colony? No popular pundit, etc., is doing that. Why would you? And there were even conversations with my dissertation committee and certainly hostile faculty, and even students, my colleagues, my peers, and some of the question was even just like, why go through all of that? And I was like, I like it. It's compelling. I find it to be the most accurate. It makes the most sense. All of the more revolutionaries who I don't ultimately cite in the book, which is a major flaw as well, particularly political prisoners, who I should have reminded this is why it's perfect with Black August. They were the political prisoners. The book was dedicated to them. I tried to work it out with AK Press, and they did not do it. I wanted all of the proceeds from the book to go to political prisoners, but in the end, I could only work it out that only whatever I got would go, and I just had to take care of it. So, not that there was tremendous amounts of money, but every penny, literally every penny that ever emerged from this book went to one or another entity working on behalf of political prisoners. Some of them are still linked in the link to the book in the show description. So I would encourage folks to, I've been saying, if you get a free digital copy, send a few dollars, if you would, to one of them. So, but again, even though I'm consciously doing that, I'm not citing them, at least not much in the book, which is, but the point was, I was doing so much in trying to explain why, and it was ultimately, and I do like that story, that I had gotten I had conflict with faculty and administration in the College of Journalism. I got exiled, resources cut off. They got real shady. But the one thing they could not do was remove me from the program, because academically they had no reason to do, and behaviorally they had no cause to remove me. What they could do is cut off the funding, cut off cut off the and then support, and then exile me. And shout out to the sisters in the main office, who, when I showed up that day looking for mail, were like, "Why are you even here?" Not in a hostile way, but like almost pleasantly surprised, because they had been given the notice to cut off my money, assuming that I would not be there anymore. And so I had to find other. But in that exile, there was, I did get to be placed next to this stack of communication scholar, the Journal of Communication journals, or communication, the Journal Communications journals, and they were actually being slated to be thrown away, which I think again is perfect, and as a metaphor. And I start reading them in this, being stuck in this exiled space, come across Hemant Shah's work on emancipatory journalism, and which was based on an anti-colonial ethic we'll talk a little bit about later. And I said, I want to do that I said, that's what I'm doing. He co-signed it, said, you are doing that. So I was like, so anyway, that was why I was trying to build. It was from there that I was working sort of backwards. So I said, emancipatory journalism is what FreeMixRadio is doing. How do I explain that? That requires, I still think, and then that we understand Black America as an internal colony, and the logic proceeds from that. So I had to just do a lot to explain why I thought that, where I was getting that from, how many others were referencing it. So I'm trying to talk about, as I mentioned here, that because it was popular at the time when I was writing this, it's still popular today, talking about the United States as an empire. Again, to me, maybe oversimplifying, maybe I'm getting something wrong because it just seems so basic, but empires do not create liberated democracies. They create colonies and subjects. They don't create citizens and democracies. The United States is not a democracy. It is, if it's an empire, it is not a democracy, it's a republic. And if it's that condemns democracy, and if it's an empire and creates not citizens but citizen subjects, or subjects and colonies and the colonized, then what then is the relationship that generates? And I still think, again, to this day, however you want to define it or explain it, it is an extractive relationship, materially and then immaterially, which is where the anti-colonial theorists and writers were so brilliant in explaining. It creates, it is necessary in creating the flawed self-concept of the superior white or colonizer. So I borrowed from Jack Odell, again, saying that it's not about a physical space, it's about a relationship that is malleable and movable, where he said, defining the colonial problem, it is the role of the institutional mechanisms of colonial domination which are decisive. Territory is merely the stage upon which these historically developed mechanisms of super exploitation are organized into a system of oppression. I've always taken that to mean the territory, the stage, is less important than the relationship. So whether Black people are in whatever part of the country, in whatever relative stage of class relations, the ultimate relationship is a colonial one that is not just a class, not just a material one, that creates an immaterial, performs a necessary immaterial function as well. So that's basically it. Then there's a lot of reference to media scholarship, to that is media studies, some more traditional media studies scholarship, and to Norman Kelly, as opposed in this case to Robin D.G. Kelly, who had talked about in his own work at the time the colonized rhythm nation, which is where the title of this chapter was borrowed. He also had a nice condemnation and critique of the Black bourgeois pundit at the time too. It was, but the point being that even within media studies, that, and really what I was saying was that if you look carefully at what others are saying, they're not maybe using the language of colonization, but they're saying that they're describing the relationship, and then just being forced in many ways in the context of the United States to fold their analysis back into acceptable frames. So they'll describe a colonized relationship and then conclude that some form of democratic reform is an acceptable path or response. It's a major problem that still exists to this day, and that would have been a better approach for me in this chapter. It just would have required reorganizing and maybe re-emphasizing some of what I was focused on here. But a lot of people did make reference to it in one form or another, including Du Bois, who said using the term colonial in much a broader sense than is usually given it, Black America did comprise a relative nation within a nation whose condition was that of a semi-colonial. Oh, I just went blank on my man's name, but Martin Delaney, nation within a nation. So that kind of language was being used. So I was just saying, if it's a nation within a nation, that's an internal colony. That's exactly. And then there was other scholarship that I referenced that was basically making that was not basically, that was itself making the same point. And then, so for instance, here, this one of my favorite quotes from Derek Bell, this was that I use all the time. He did not use the language of colonization, but my goodness, if the nation's policies towards blacks were revised to require weekly random roundups of several hundred blacks who were then taken to a secluded place and shot, that policy would be more dramatic, but hardly different in result than the policies now in effect, which most of us feel powerless to change. I mean, that's, you know. And I also like this part here about from Fanon in talking about what this produces, a racism that he said cannot be unconscious. Whether they sell out to attack it or to vulgarize it, restores racism. That means a social group, a country, a civilization cannot be unconsciously racist. Which I just have always liked that line in terms of sort of discussions around racism and white supremacy as happening again unconsciously or you know. Okay, so but that was essentially what I was trying to do in that initial chapter, explain why I was using internal colonialism theory, referencing Robert Allen, William Tabb, and a variety, many others who in various ways either talked specifically about Black America as an internal colony or spoke about the relationship that colonization develops. So I was just wanting to by the way, this is, I do you know, this was also a turnoff to a number of people who to a number of people who were initially interested in the book because they realized that from their perspective, too little of it was actually about mixtapes, and I, you know, and they may have had a point, but I still think the idea was right that you can't really understand what the FreeMix Radio project was doing or meant to do, or the context in which it was working, or the history of the mixtape if you don't understand these histories. So that was at least the logic. Again, I'm definitely open to how it could have been presented differently or better, but in this chapter, chapter 2, Media as Ideology, Culture, and Colonialism, when Goebbels, the brainchild behind Nazi propaganda, heard culture being discussed, he brought out his revolver. He had a clear idea of the value of culture as a factor of resistance to foreign domination. Amilcar Cabral. And what I liked about how, at least my interpretation of that quote is what and why I wanted to use it here is to situate that media is related to power, and media has a very material impact on the world. The reference to a weapon, the reference to colonization, a reference to power, that's exactly how I think we need to understand media. And then from the welfare poets, it's the media causing mass hysteria in all areas, the barriers to emancipation. And I don't think you can see it too clearly, and it's not a high quality picture, but so even trying to enlarge it wouldn't help much. But this is again the colonialism and mass media model I developed as a response to Dr. McAdams saying I needed one, and really saying she and the committee needed one. But I like it, and I still use it from time to time, and I still think it's largely appropriate and just needs a little bit of updating. And as we'll talk some about, there is a good cause for that updating. Oh, wait a minute. Did I pass? Wait a minute. There's a major error that I needed to address. And I think did I pass? I did pass that point. So just before this point in the book, I need to address an error. So forgive me. Oh man, I got this so wrong. Well, he got it wrong. And I quoted it ignorantly and incorrectly. So this is one part of the book that does not age well at all. On page 44 of the hard copy, I'm attempting to, so earlier I made the point that I was wanting to synthesize the African-centered world and the materialist world. And I have to say that this came up when on EYL we had that discussion with Doctors Nadov and Molefi Asante. I really wish the African-centered world would give a better and more honest and thorough reading of Marx than I think that many popular spokespeople in that community do. And my point, I'm not mad at the Eurocentric critique. Initially, I say that because when you look at the engagement of the African and broader colonized world and Marx, so much beautiful rebellion and analysis has occurred. So even for no other reason than that. And this was so Aikwe Amar, who is very well respected as he should be in the African-centered community, who separately from this would in 2008 or 7 make an almost equally incorrect analysis of Barack Obama, making the argument that Obama's mixture would help somehow be a net positive for the African world, that his ascension and mixture would situate him to help the African world. But on page 44 of my book here, I cite him because I was looking for African-centered thinkers who were talking about Marx, because I wanted to bring that discussion here, even where there was critique, because I thought I was demonstrating, I would be able to demonstrate the value of Marx's thought to African struggle. And what I did was I quoted Armand in so obviously there's this discussion that Fanon has of Marx and others have, showing some of his shortcomings in terms of what he didn't understand about colonization in the African world. All that's great. And that's fine, because Fanon is not condemning Marx and saying that Africans should ignore him because he's Eurocentric. He's raising a critique of someone whose work is of value. That would be my assessment there. But what Armand does, and what I pick up, is that he says that this cultural focus, so well articulated historically by Fanon and Cabral, is also an attempt. So Cabral similarly has a critique of Marx, but from a different way, from a different frame, differently. So well articulated historically by Fanon and Cabral is also an attempt at moving beyond the limits of Marx, which, as Aikwe Armand suggests, are found in his binding Eurocentricity and lack of praxis. This is where he and then I go way wrong. And over the years that I've learned much more about Marx, this is wildly wrong. This age is, what is the opposite of fine wine? That's what this age is like. According to Armand, the flaws of applying or centering Marxist thought in the context of colonialism from the perspective of the colonized is that Marx's ideas may, quote, constitute an interesting body of hypotheses useful as probes, but not theories, end quote. What makes people revolutionary for Armagh, unlike Marx and Engels, is that they become, quote, participants in actual praxis in a movement that overturns an oppressive social system, replacing the oppressive rulers with the oppressed, end quote. This, according to Armagh, distinguishes Lenin, Mao, Diop, Ho, Fanon, and Cabral as revolutionaries. For Fanon, the aspects of race and culture pointed toward key deficiencies in Marx. And then I go on to quote Fanon there. So Armagh is at least being accurate to other in the materialist world, that is Lenin, Mao, Diop, Ho, Fanon, and Cabral. But he gets wrong the idea that Marx was not involved in praxis. So I just wanted to come back and acknowledge that he and I are both wrong on that point, and that wherever there is a critique of Marx to be had, and there are, it shouldn't be that he wasn't basically down with the fight. I think that's unfair and incorrect. But okay. All right. And I'm not in the chat yet, so you know, I don't want to say take it easy on me in the chat.
Phrasing.
But I'll dip back in a little bit. All right, so chapter 2, again, media's ideology, culture, and colonialism. This was the model. I love this model. And it isn't my attempt again to synthesize this divide that may, this contradiction that may not be possible. I may be wrong here. But the point is that to explain this to my dissertation committee, and it has been helpful even in the classroom, to sort of break down what it is that I'm trying to say about, in this case, media as ideology, culture, and colonialism. So I start up here in the big bubble at the top with the ideological basis of mass media, where Karl Marx said that commodity is the original sin of capitalism. That is commodity formation, turning everything into something that can be bought, sold, or traded was an original sin of capitalism. The late, great Greg Tate said that African people were this country's, that is the United States, the original sin in this country was the commodification of African people, or that African people were this country's original sin, this country's original commodity. That African people are the original commodity of the United States. John Downing and Charles Husband in their work said that racism is the conceptual original sin of the United States. And that in their own ways, Marimba Ani and Amos Wilson said that destroying African culture is a political necessity as part of the process, as I'm saying it, of the colonization of African descendants or African people here in the United States. Then from there, it would obviously need updating, but descend basically the core elements of the process that I'll be talking about in the succeeding chapters. So there's a cultural industry on the one hand, and again, Dr. McAdams, for the model I use in the dissertation, there were more arrows. She wanted more, showing how everything is pointing and this and that, and she wanted to make sure that I was accounting for the ability, or that is the agency of the colony to impact the colonizer. And we had a little bit of a discussion around that, because I don't like agency, as I don't like the promotion of agency, because it because as my point was with that was it encourages the illusions that we spend so much time on this platform discussing. That is it's not really an agency being exacted on the colonizer by the colonized. It is a colonized effort or expression that becomes co-opted and corrupted and part of the colonial process. Or as Fanon talked about it, it becomes ossified in a colonial form, what is produced. So that's why so much of what looks like progress and what we get so often caught up and encouraged to promote and be excited about is really just a corrupted version of what it should be. It's not a liberating endeavor. So I don't like emphasis or really much discussion of agency at all. The big three in the culture industry would have changed by now, and we'll talk a little bit in let's see, where are my notes here? We'll talk a little bit about it later around copyright, but whereas at this time it was UMG, Warner Music, and EMI, today the dominant music companies are still UMG, Sony, and Warner Music Group, but they also are in an incestuous relationship with the Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon, and one or two others I'm probably forgetting. So it's not that the culture industry has changed so much, but the names would have been needed to make some adjustment. But they are what determine what becomes popular. And even to this day, what becomes popular requires support. Again, whether we like it or is not really the point. It's not a critique of the art that I'm making here. It's to point out again that it is controlled. Then I talk about the mechanism of intellectual property and copyright. That is in fact a mechanism, and we'll talk more about that as well. Here I talk about top 40 playlists, but we would be, for radio that are constructed to reflect the dominant companies. Today, it's obviously Spotify playlists and things like that, but the same concept. And whereas we were talking about consolidated radio at the time, we're now talking about consolidated distribution platforms like YouTube and the like. But the same goal is to manage the outcomes, to manage what forms of politics and popularity emerge and impact the neo-domestic or internal Black colony. And then this is buttressed by the institution of education. And in media studies, a lot of the discussion traditionally has been, which impacted this model here, the relationship of education to communication. And so this chapter is just an elaboration of that. And again, my attempt to find what I thought I was doing a lot at the time was I'm finding existing examples that reflect the explanation or reflect what the model is meant to explain. So I mean, here, I'm referencing Zbigniew Brzezinski, whose daughter Misha is still on the TV every morning, and what he says in the global chessboard. But basically he's saying the American global system emphasizes the technique of co-optation to a much greater extent than the earlier imperial systems did. And he's saying all of the foregoing are reinforced by the massive but intangible impact of American domination of global communications, popular entertainment, and mass culture, by the potentially very tangible clout of America's technological edge and military reach. So he's basically saying when the soft power of media doesn't work, we do have the military, but that is, we, the United States, are in control of, and part of what he said was that a lot of the conversation is still in English. And then, of course, we would say today that a lot of it is controlled and owned and benefits American corporations, hedge funds, and private equity. But essentially what I was just trying to show was, again, just an overview of what that model, just to introduce the model and why I was using the model in that way, quickly explain what did Marx mean by commodity, and so on and so on and so on. I do have a note here that what I also have, and I called it a hodgepodge in the chapter of Afrocentricity, intercommunalism, and Marxism, which is, again, something that I think could have been more clarified and explained, as it were, in terms of my again, attempt to synthesize and the overlaps and parallels, and whereas some may see differences that are maybe incontrovertible, that I see a lot that is useful and overlapping. So, for instance, I mean, you know, yeah. Anyway, so that's what. So chapter 3, education and conceptual boundaries, again, just basically going through that model. Schools and schooling in capitalist America are very little different from the other institutions and their methodological processes in capitalist America. Institutions operate from a well-programmed blueprint, which is designed to serve the people in an unequal and hierarchical manner. To serve the people can be readily translated into serve the devil. The heinous nature of capitalist America gives easy rise to a feeling of existing in a living hell for the majority of the exploited. Gloria Joseph. The tendency is here born of slavery and quickened to renewed life by the crazy imperialism of the day, to regard human beings as among the material resources of a land, to be trained with an eye single to future dividends. We daily hear that an education that encourages aspiration, that sets the loftiest ideals and seeks as an end culture and character rather than bread winning, is the privilege of white men and the danger and delusion of black. W.E.B. Du Bois. The social sciences were integral to the maintenance of bourgeois rule, not only in the United States, but over America's expanding colonial empire in the South Pacific, the Caribbean, and Latin America. The American colonial empire was also domestic in the colonization of the dark-skinned racial groups of the South and West, Indians, Mexicans, and the largest internal colony, Afro-Americans. The late, great Dr. James Turner and W. Eric Perkins. And that's essentially what this chapter is about. It's a summary of the discussion of others and their work around what is the role historically of education in managing the outcomes of an internally colonized population. That before we can get to, as I reference here, the indoctrinating power of media, we have to understand the preconditioning that does not start with the mass production of radio and television and the centralization of their control. The people entered this stage as preconditioned receptacles of long standing. And that's Marcuse. So that's what this chapter is ultimately saying, that before we can get into it, that before people turn on their YouTubes, before people go to the movies and put in their, or put click their downloads and streams, they have been already evolved in a colonized educational process, rife with white supremacy, capitalist, patriarchal logic, settler logic, and prepares them to be those preconditioned receptacles. So there's a discussion briefly in the chapter of the colonial foundations of education. And then there is some discussion that I pulled from my master's thesis on Dr. Clark in talking about some of the intellectual efforts created by Africans to resist. And this is sort of a component of what I've thought of as the FreeMixRadio project was a media space, an intellectual space created akin to what those of the Reading Room Society and the American Negro Academy and the Woodson Study for Negro Life and History, Association for Study of Negro Life and History, and the Harlem History Club. That's what I saw as the project as I don't know, maybe alluding to, referencing, shouting out, if not, aspiring to, maybe, I don't know. All right, chapter 4, just following through the model, the journalism and conceptual boundaries. The origin of the word newspaper is lost in the mists of time. The word evidently had its origin in the diurna, which of course is the etymological ancestor of journal. And the word journalist seems to have made its first appearance in 17th century England as a synonym for writer and mercurist. The reference to the messenger of the gods of Greece indicates the function of the journalist as the agent of his employers, commissioned to transmit messages. Herbert Altschul. Who's got control of your mind, your worldview? Something you taking the movie, you taking your girl to. The FBI, the CIA, ATF, KKK, IRS, TNT, CBS, NBC, from Dead Prez. And this is just talks the critique that I was studying heavily at the time around journalism and journalism education. The sources that cause so many problems in the classroom, references, the debates, because if you read even what was the assigned work, they're just telling you of so much of the problem. I mean, there's so many footnotes, because I'm just citing everything that we were basically being assigned, and that was discussed in those assignments. But that journalism is here to set conceptual boundaries, to create, as it says here, dominant meanings. What is called news has long since been determined to be biased politically, outright racist, for sale, demonstrating a strong class bias, all under consolidated ownership, and things are no different today. Maybe one of the biggest shifts is, at least on the left side of the aisle, so to speak, is the ability for there to be, as we saw with what was supposed to have been the Intercept and what Barrett Brown is always talking about, the Pierre Omidyars, who are able to be a left-wing independent, what I saw critically happening at the Real News, where you can have thrown into the mix, so to speak, pun intended, independent, nominally independent, but privately funded by rich, often white men, entities that perform journalism that's meant to counter all of this, but ultimately does so much of the same thing. And as we'll come to when we talk about the chapter on white liberals, this became a major problem for me with this book. I think that is being critical of the preceding structure that I think at the time. So this is just going through some of the journalism, again, those critiques at the time of not only mainstream, but so-called alternative journalism. And as I mentioned here, rarely discussed in prevailing media or hip-hop scholarship is the tradition of underground radical or emancipatory journalism. or the function, as I could have been more clear in making the point here, that the mixtape played in distributing some of those ideas. But anyway, so that was the point of that chapter, just to quickly highlight in terms of the model, the role journalism is meant to play, some of the contradictions and conflicts there, yeah. So chapter 5, revisiting the corporation and cultural industry. What they now call corporate media, we used to just call the white media, Glenn Ford. I'll never put my 2 guns down because I need them for the industry shakedown. Bumpy Knuckles, AKA Freddie Fox. And essentially in this chapter, it's just a discussion of what is a cultural industry that is, or industries as some prefer, that is the array of organized corporations that dominate the distribution of popular culture. And then I talk a little bit about their relationship again to the power elite, that they're meant to cloak their invisible class empire, that corporations themselves perform the function of creating anonymity for those who rule, forcing us to say they and them, allowing for the intersection. I don't really point this out here, but allowing for people to interject silly conspiracies because you force to say they and them, as where it becomes more difficult to find the individual players or to identify their class or political interests. And that, as I mentioned in that introductory video, we in terms of music, we have, as Greg Pallas said, a musical OPEC, and they determine sort of the flow and organize the wealth extraction from the culture produced, in this case, largely by internally colonized African descended people. So this would need to be again updated. I talked a little bit about those companies in this chapter, and just elaborate a little bit more about the particularly the role of interlocking boards of directors, which to this day is a major problem. The business roundtable still exists. I mean, so the business elite, the ruling elite in the corporate world, they're unified. They're working together. They're organized to extract, in this case, the cultural production of colonized people, not only for wealth creation materially, but to manage the popular depiction of those communities, ideas distributed in those communities and around the world, and to suppress any forms of radicalism that might emerge. Chapter 6, the politics of popular culture. It's very important to understand that music, like all art, regardless of its form, is ideological. My godfather, Thomas Porter. It is one of the great ironies of history that our people were stripped of their material cultural identities when they were shipped to the plantations of the Americas to be placed in no place, while the stripped cultural artifacts were taken to Europe to be housed perhaps in the most elegantly built palaces, museums, basilicas, and university halls. Ayeli Bakari. Shout out to Dr. Ayeli Bakari. And here I just am really trying to say in this chapter that, again, the form we see in pop culture is never an accurate representation of what it claims to be. All popularity is fraudulent. So as I said here, Jesus is no more Heru than Obama is black people or manhood. Mary is no more Aset than Oprah Winfrey is black people or womanhood. And today we're in sort of a hyperdrive of this problem, where and it's even worse because today, as I continue to argue, we get more presentation of not only people and images, but of radical histories than ever before that are all depicted in this exact same form with the same exact intent. As Mr. Porter says, art, regardless of its form, is ideological. So the dominant ideology of this society is a variety of white supremacy, capitalism, settler colonialism, patriarchy, etc., and so forth. That's what we get, and that's what drives even the depiction of colonized people and their struggles. And then out of that contradiction comes this point that Fanon makes, that we have to remember that as much as we love our art and our cultural expression and so much about this and that, about us and ourselves, so much of it is generated and formed by the suffering. So as Fanon said, without oppression, without racism, you have no blues. Without internal colonialism, you have no hip hop, you have no mixtape. So as much as we may want to praise, as people continue to do with this 50th anniversary and whatnot of hip hop and all of that, et cetera, and so forth, and as much as people may have at this time or to this day, as we'll see in a little bit, praise the mixtape, they do so to the detriment of the conditions and the context that produces all of this greatness. So my point in chapter 6 is also, as I made a note to myself here, blackface and minstrelsy are the foundations of U.S. pop culture, and the performance of blackness, of a blackness that is acceptable to whites, is essential to the cultural industries. And to this day, that is even a more intensified, the problem is even more intensified. So here in chapter 7, intellectual property, copyright, and the ownership of thought. This was for me, one of the more fascinating adventures in studying at the time, to learn about intellectual property and the role that copyright plays in maintenance of a colony. Because when you control art and expression, you control its distribution, its omission, you control the wealth produced from it, you control and shape what future forms will take that try to mimic what people see becomes acceptable and popular. So it's very important. Personal is political. My thoughts, my words, everything that I believe in my life are not entirely original, definitely not entirely mine. Indeed, they are derived from and hence belong to the entire world, past, present, and its future. There is nothing so personal in my life that is not shaped by the political worldviews I have subscribed to or refuted. Hence, this blog is copy left, not copyrighted. Feel free to distribute contents to fellow travelers for education, agitation, and organization toward an alternative world. Saswat Patianak, my homeboy, and a brilliant photographer and essayist and poet, and a peer in my graduate classrooms at the University of Maryland. The dude is sharp. And so this was a shout out to him, but also because he's exactly making the point right, that all of our ideas are born from, as Nas said, nothing is original, are born from our collective experience and should not be the exclusive ownership of ourselves under. And in this context, there definitely shouldn't be the kind of ownership we see today. Then, as Pharoah Monch said, the A&R is the house nigga that labels the plantation. Now switch that advance for your emancipation. Shout out to Pharoah, who gets a number of references and epigraph in this book. And essentially here, I just go through some of the history of copyright. And one of the more impressive things that I will share here that I haven't really shared too much before is, at the time I don't even remember how this happened, but I got set up with the intellectual property law clinic within, this was, oh my God, was it Georgetown or was it Americans Law School? Because it's not on the paper, oddly. There's no attribution because I got the document they produced. So these graduates, these law students, they had an intellectual property law clinic that at the time was very much interested in mashups and the battle over copyright over the song Happy Birthday. One of their professors was involved with that fight. it wasn't UDC, definitely wasn't that. It was either Georgetown Law or American Law. Maybe it was a George Washington Law School. But it was the law clinic there, and what they did was they took my FreeMixRadio case, so to speak, and did an extensive report and study on would my FreeMixRadio mixtapes be quote unquote legal. Now, on the one hand, as we discussed, I didn't care. I didn't want, in fact, the illegality of it was preferable to me. But it was fascinating. So one of the things that they said here, I'll read a quick excerpt. The manner in which FreeMix uses copyrighted source material might be categorized as recontextualization. FreeMix is a work that makes use of existing material in an attempt to fashion its own unique expression. In our opinion, the difference of primary importance between the forms of appropriation art above and FreeMix in terms of appropriation and recontextualization is that all of the above works are art proper. FreeMix is instead a work of critical informative expression, whereas in the examples given above, the repurposing of content to invite new interpretations and meaning is affected through aesthetic manipulation. FreeMix relies heavily on the expressive effect of juxtapositioning various content coupled with the addition of original material. Therefore, one assumption in analogizing FreeMix to these other appropriating works is that a court would find transformative recontextualization in an informal educational setting. I thought it was dope. And what my intent was, I did intend when the book was published, despite what I said about wanting it to be kept compact and in people's pockets as they got busy, is that I did want to publish these 30 pages, and I had been given the right to do it, but the publisher didn't want to do it. But I should make it, because I think, particularly if you're interested ever in copyright law, there's a lot here that they cover in terms of the history and the case law that would have been relevant up until about, I guess, 2010. So, but anyway. But ultimately, my point in this chapter is just to show how copyright functions to not protect artists, which is often the claim, but to assure that what forms of art that become popular are managed and controlled and vetted, and that particularly radical ideas and threatening ideas and cultural expression would be suppressed and negated. And really, for more on that, I would encourage people, if you really want more of my own discussion, that check the video that I'll put it in the show description, where I talked about this recent issue of AI versus the music industry, where this all comes up again in a very modern case, where again the recording industry artists of America, the RIAA, which is supposed to protect recording artists, really protects the copyright holders, which are the corporations that own all of the popular culture, who are now wanting to sue AI companies for basically mimicking their catalog. And they claim again that they're doing it to protect copyrights holders, the artists, but they're really doing it to protect their own bottom line financially. I think more importantly, which is never discussed openly, is that they're trying to protect and make sure that what forms of popular discussion exist are managed and suppressed and limited. So just quickly, the history of copyright, not coincidentally, begins in 18th century England, right in line with the development of modern capitalism and the expansion of empire. So it's always been part of an imperial process. It's a core media ownership policy. Copyrights are a tradable commodity, Marx's original sin. And they allow for corporations to determine what becomes popular in the public sphere. And it's a major business. It's as a subset of intellectual property. It's billions of dollars. And then there's a little bit of a critique of some of at the time recent work a book called Stealing Empire. I did an interview with the author, and it was a friendly disagreement, but just over what they were arguing was the potential efficacy of the internet in circumventing copyright. And I thought that they were missing the point about what copyright is as a function in empire. But that was that. There's that. Chapter 8, Payola and playlists. Payola has replaced the ears and eyes of radio and video programmers. I've seen the process grow firsthand. The industry has followed the nation. Capitalism has replaced talent and creativity. Anyone who tells you anything else is stating a bold-faced lie. Paul Porter, the brilliant, experienced radio programmer. I learned a lot from him, and just, you know, again, one of the unfortunate for me, you know, like I said, going through this book again there was some trauma involved, and you know, shout out to Paul, man, salute to Paul. In the future, when social scientists study the mixtape phenomenon, they will conclude in fancy language that the mixtape was a form of speech, particular to the late 20th century, soon replaced by the playlist. Dean Wareham, that was a bar. And the DJs don't really give a fuck about what you're saying as long as the payola paying. As long as the payola paying, then somebody will play it. Hassan Salam, who, if I remember correctly, has gone on to leave the radical rap world for the radical adult expressive world. But shout out to Hassan Salam. For a minute there, was definitely one of my favorite MCs. And Dean Wareham is exactly right. I mean, he was prescient that the playlist has replaced the mixtape. And as we'll see, literally in a recent article, they make that point without making the point that is being made in this book. And specifically, what I'm going to do is very quickly share one of those recent examples from just last month. The music industry is engineering artist popularity. Listeners are right to be angry. In fact, what I'll do is let me come back to that. Let me clarify my own argument here, and then I'll come back to that. The point is that this chapter about payola and playlists was to make the point that at the time, the playlist was the program director playlist. That is what was given program directors to, or by program directors to DJs to play on radio and video stations like MTV, VH1, and that it was a paid for playlist. It was constructed by the dominant music industry, music companies paying through drugs, money, tickets, sex, whatever, to get into heavy rotation people's music. So that the idea, as Eric Bollard is quoted as saying, most listeners don't know it, but virtually every song they hear on FM commercial radio has been paid for indirectly by 5 major record labels. So much like today, in a more pervasive media environment, everything that is around us in terms of politics, entertainment, whatever, is just another form of advertising. Paid to be placed. So in some of today's language, in terms of artists, they would be talking about it in terms of industry plants. So this chapter is just a summary of the history of payola, and my argument that, again, the point of all of this is to, as a mechanism of how the colonial process plays out, that we're not just talking about payola for controlling what's on the radio. We're talking about payola for control as part of, as we'll get to in a moment, what media and radio function, how they're meant to function in a colony. That is, again, to manage what becomes popular, to limit ideologically, ideationally, what is put into effect by those who are colonized. So this is where, again, I'll just share very quickly this recent article that's talking about by Shad D'Souza, talking about numerous tactics, including payola-like deals on Spotify, are promoting artists people haven't chosen to hear, but the industry refuses to discuss it. For months, one question has been plaguing pop fans. Why is Spotify playing me the same songs over and over and over again? Others describe the prevalence of artists in autoplay as payola, reviving the term for when a record label pays a radio station to play its music, and this mindset is easier to understand. So in other words, long story short, whatever it is, discovery mode or whatever automated whatever pops up on the top when you load the Spotify and all that is being paid for and put there by the relationship Spotify has with the top three. So Bollard was talking about 5. It's really just 3 now, UMG, Sony, and Warner Music Group, who are paying to have all of their artists put on at the top. But people don't want to talk about it for fear of being blacklisted. They don't want to talk on the record. It's still like a taboo subject. And as I talk about in my chapter here, I for one semester had a grad student working with me as a research assistant one time for one semester in 2007. And she did some great, Leah Taylor, she cited in here, did some great research and interviewed the then program director, Victor Starr, of 92Q in Baltimore to get him to talk about payola and playlists, and he denied it and defended how they promote news, etc., and so forth and whatever. But the point was, it was much like it is today. Nobody really wants to talk about it because they don't want to acknowledge that what we are being told is our agency as consumers is being shaped. We're being told what artists to like and to listen to, and being almost made to like them. So that's why I keep saying, how do you know what you know, like what you like? And when you do like something, you should be even more critical of it in terms of like, how did it get here? Chapter 9, I'm not going to spend too much time on it. It was my look at specifically in the context of Washington, D.C. at the time where the FreeMixRadio project was taking place. This is D.C. You might think that you own it, a piece of South Africa on the Potomac. See, you can't vote, but you got to pay taxes, not a city or state because they're scared of the blacks. Fuck Chocolate City. Imagine the chocolate state with 2 chocolate senators in the debate. Shout out to DJ U-Rock, where I got that, citing there. November of the year 2000, Washington Post magazine, and learn about how black housing in Southwest was demolished by the thousands to make a way for a fresh new look, to better the urban situation, the creation of a safe haven called gentrification. That's when they don't put money in your hood's education, and graduation dropout rates suffer from inflation. Facilities decrepit mold in the ventilation. There's devastation clear and present at the food station. Rehabilitation is needed, but the speed is hesitation. And the next thing you know, for a pot of gold, the result is a gymnasium. And now there's white folks in the cut walking with their pit bulls looking like nigga what? Shout out to Head Rock, the mayor of DC hip hop. Obviously, I'm not spitting any of these rhymes as well as they did, but shout out to them. And then this is the bullshit, the extreme bullshit, the absolute bullshit. This is the bullshit of bullshit. This bullshit is so bullshit. I never want to hear this bullshit on any of the radios or in my children's ears because it's bullshit. I present to you the bullshit. Salute to J. Rue, the Damager, on that great track produced by DJ Premier. And then Radio 1 is Black Power, said by Kathy Hughes, founder of Radio 1. The absolute bullshit is delivered during her keynote speech to Morgan State University's 2007 graduating class. And it's in here that if you go to the link in the show description where you can get a free copy of the book if you want it, and as we'll talk a little bit about in a little bit, the free companion mixtape. And don't worry, for people who are, who are not able to stay, I know this is turning into a longer live. I will timestamp it up and all of that so people can revisit and go back and forth as much as they want or don't. But the in that at that link where you get the book and the mixtape, there's a summary of errors that I've covered in a separate video in the book, in addition to the one that I added, another glaring one for today. But it includes a reference and a shout out again to Dr. Carr, who in a discussion with his class where he had assigned this book at one point to a class, they point out that one of the errors of this chapter is that I don't talk about WHUR, which was a huge mistake. At the time, I was largely thinking about what would have been targeting Black youth and playing hip hop, and HUR might not have fit that, but it should have been talked about in terms of the environment that I'm describing here in terms of Black radio and radio in general and the media environment of Washington, D.C., and why and referencing Glenn Ford and the Pew Research Center, talking about how so much of that media environment was devoid of actual news, devoid of news about the Black local community, and would have been completely devoid of news relevant to Black activists and radicalism. So with the few exceptions, shout out to WPFW, which having been there for years, I mean, it was fraught with all kinds of contradictions and flaws in terms of these politics themselves. But the DC media environment, which is not that unlike any other, was not suitable to creating, as Chela Sandoval talks about here, the oppositional consciousness, which must precede, as I argued here, oppositional political organization and activity. So we can't expect that consciousness to evolve from a media environment that targets, Black youth in particular, with nonsense. So when we talk, and this is why when we talk about Radio 1, and as Glenn Ford talked about in terms of Kathy Hughes and her engagement with the Black community in news, his argument was let them eat talk. And he talked specifically about how Radio 1 played a vital role in turning Black news into talk radio. And by today, we see that has just evolved into total madness. So that's what that chapter was largely about. Chapter 10, National Public Radio and FANON'S Radio-ALGER. Again, I will always credit Dr. Chris Tinson, who for this putting me onto this connection and having me, go back and focus on FANON'S discussion of Radio-ALGER as I was developing my critique of National Public Radio, because I had a specific criticism for NPR at the time, which I think is itself at this point passé, except for the fact that it was describing accurately the goal of national media in oversimplifying FANON'S point, comforting immaterially the white settler. So for NPR, violence is calm if it's violence against Palestinians. Again, prescient, a quote from Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting. And I was driving home from work the other day and torturing myself listening to NPR, said Noam Chomsky. So, but I have to credit Dr. Chris Tinson with getting me to make the comparison between NPR and FANON'S Radio-ALGER in creating for, despite his very public and inaccurate, that is Tinson's very public and inaccurate discussion of me at one point some years ago, for which he still owes me an apology and an explanation. But again, why this book is revisiting it is a bit traumatic, but it was his idea. and he was right. And it was a brilliant point that an NPR is exactly, and I would argue, broadly speaking, all nationally sanctioned mass media, commercial mass media in this society, and even non-commercial. I would argue the popularity of the Rush Limbaughs and the Alex Joneses as maybe unsanctioned, non-commercial media, whatever, not officially sanctioned. But the fact of their popularity performs the same function that national public radio is meant to perform, that is in cajoling and comforting the white settler and making them feel that their project of white settler colonialism is in fact legit and what they're doing is okay. And when they hear stories, and as I talk about NPR in targeting a white, affluent, upper middle class, Alex Jones and Rush Limbaugh, and I probably should have made this point here, do the same thing in stylizing their argument for their lower middle class and lower class constituency, all of which, that is, so the softer tones and the soft tones of NPR that they made brilliant fun of on SNL for a few years with sweaty balls and all of that kind of stuff, is stylized to comfort the affluent in the same way the I'm gonna have to quit and get my survival pack and all that kind of stuff is meant to comfort the white survivalist settler colonist. But that's what the goal is meant to do. So I wanted to just highlight that in a critique, all to get to the point that I get to here in chapter 11 about managed outcomes, that whether we're talking about the music industry, the culture industry, the commercial media, national NPR, all of it is to arrive at managed outcomes. So popular culture is not just an art form, it's a form of propaganda. And propaganda gets black activists killed. If you put out the wrong propaganda, you are setting me up to be killed by my enemy, Dhoruba bin Wahad, who will be joining me tomorrow, by the way, talk a little bit in the context, at least, of Gerald Horne's new book on armed struggle. Y'all stuck on Laffy Taffy. I'm wondering, how did y'all niggas get past me, Ghostface Killer? And omission is worse than lying, Howard Zinn. So again, the summary, the attempt here was to talk about this process of predation that I heard Ward Churchill describe once so brilliantly, and that predator needs, in this case, to manage the outcomes of a popular media and entertainment environment. I made the connection to the counterintelligence program attacks and their goals. I made reference to George Jackson here, talking about Cosby, and pointing out that Bill Cosby, acting out the establishment agent, what message was the soul brother conveying to our children? I Spy was certainly programmed to a child's mentality. This running dog in the company of a fascist with a cause, a flunky's flunky. So he's talking about the propaganda of propaganda, that is George, and talking about the popular use of Bill Cosby to project an FBI back to black and other audiences as being acceptable. Obviously, today, George would have endless amounts of examples. Everyone from Queen Latifah to Denzel Washington to Ice-T to Ice Cube to LL to Will Smith and Martin Lawrence right now, all of them portraying positive images of police. As we just talked about on Saturdays with Renee the other day, police violence is increasing against black people and everybody else every year. So I was just trying to point out here that part of the managed outcome of this media environment is to produce a compliant colonized population that will not raise questions and certainly organize that colonization out of existence. Shout out again to Glenn Ford and Bruce Dixon, who at the time were calling for a News for the People coalition, saying that political organizations needed to coalesce to make not assaults, that's not the right word, to put public pressure on Black targeted radio to produce news for the people. And I don't know to what extent something like that could happen today, but the goal of producing news for the people is why Black liberation media exists. It's that exact ethic. All right, so chapter 12, the mixtape and emancipatory journalism. Peace to Ron G, Brucey B, Kid Capri, Funk Master Flex, Love Bug, Star Ski. Of course, that's Notorious B.I.G. May he rest in peace. Mixtapes is the way I speak. Mixtapes is the way I communicate. Mixtapes is like my radio, my TV show. Shout out to DJ Lazy K. We're taking over radio at Whack Media. Nothing can save you. Shout out to Cut Chemist and Al Dente. The mixtape is hip hop's original mass medium, and my goal was it was through the mixtape that hip hop was able to spread throughout New York, throughout the East Coast primarily. Some talk about some duplicated, not some various forms of it happening elsewhere in the Midwest and in the West Coast, but primarily it was an East Coast phenomenon. But the point being that it was an unsanctioned form of communication. Hip hop was itself an unsanctioned form of communication that needed an unsanctioned communicative network. And the mixtape provided that. So my argument was that we should apply the philosophy of emancipatory journalism coined by Hemant Shah as an anti-colonial philosophy of journalism to the mixtape to perform the function of the News for the People coalition, to say if we can't put pressure on the radio stations, we'll create mixtapes that do mixtaping while providing news. So as I try to point out that both the mixtape and emancipatory journalism, maybe one more consciously than the other, have origins in the irreverence of anti-colonial struggle. So I'm not arguing that the mixtapes were evolved as some conscious in the effort in the way that emancipatory journalism was, but I am arguing that we should emphasize and focus on how the colonization produced similar responses, even unconsciously. And that's why I've always liked that line from Kwame Ture, that the job of the conscious is to make the unconscious conscious of their unconscious behavior. The origins and the evolution of mixtape is itself an unconscious anti-colonial act. So the argument in this chapter was that if we understand, again, in reference to some of the copyright organizations here, the RIA, et cetera, if we understand the form of copyright, if we understand what mixtape DJs are doing, if we understand why, and I make reference to some of this here, why vendors are accosted and given police records, if we understand that is itself a part of the colonial response to an unsanctioned form of communication among the colonized, it would help us evolve a certain politic that is necessary. So if we understand that when Cute Screwball puts out the Who Shot Rudy track on a mixtape and then are chased down by police and harassed by police and arrested and beaten by police for it, that it's an overt recognition that no, even in an underground media, unsanctioned communicative space that is already deemed illegal, if you say something that we don't like, we will come and find you. They weren't harassing the mixtape producers that were talking about dope dealing and violence against women and all this other kind. They didn't do any of that. But they were policing it, pun intended, for that emancipatory journalistic role. So the model I included here from Hemant Shah is just that if we compare the emancipatory model to the prevailing model, we can start to produce a new form of journalism, create new spaces for it, and build new activist and militant efforts as a result. I did squeeze in here. It's not well done, but I did squeeze in here reference to the Go-Go PA tape. And I think Mazi Mutafa gave me that idea too, that the specific history of the Go-Go PA tape, the public announcing tape that distributed the music of Go-Go throughout the city when radios and elsewhere wouldn't play it, it performed that same unconscious function that should be included in this discussion. So chapter 13, FreeMix Radio, the original mixtape radio show. Practice without thought is blind. Thought without practice is empty. Kwame Nkrumah. I'ma hold you down. I got you. One more repetition, I'ma spot you. This is for my blue collar workers, beer guzzling, bootleg, DVD hustling, push. Never let them place the muzzle. Never let them place the muzzle and push. Pharaoh Monch. A railroad 2 underground like Harriet Tubman. While y'all stay struggling, we smuggle MCs through the streets till we bubbling on mixed CDs, hustling. Clan see me on the block and say freeze. I say fuck you. I'm a man. I'm free. Also from Pharaoh Monch. So we've talked already a lot about the FreeMix project. The video I demonstrated, played at the beginning. If folks didn't see it, go back to the beginning and see the foundational, historic, I think now 18-year-old video about the FreeMix Radio project. It is, to this day, it's my favorite thing I think I've ever been involved with. It's one of my favorite ideas that I've contributed to. It's one of, I just love the idea. And I still think it was a hot idea to take the mixtape and infuse speeches and originally produced interviews and audio snippets, all meant to create this energy and to build political organization. So, you know what I'd like to do, in fact, what I think I need to do is, before we wrap this up and get to Q&A, I'm going to take a quick, as I think they say, bio break. So what I'll do is, in fact, at least for a moment, I'll just play some of that same video again. I'm sure some who are now here haven't seen it, and probably won't play the whole thing, but just take a quick break and come back and wrap this up. So don't go anywhere.
FreeMix Radio.
When worst come to worst, my peoples come first. My peoples come first.
Underground press for the 21st century. FreeMix Radio.
What's up, world? I am Jared Ball, the Funkinest journalist, founder, creator, and producer of FreeMix Radio, the original mixtape radio show. Often enough, when I am passing out FreeMix mixtapes, teaching or discussing mixtape radio, people ask why we do what we do and how. So we thought a quick video demonstration of both the why and how was in order, and to that end, welcome to the Liberated Masses Media basement studio of Second Childhood Productions in Washington, D.C., the birthplace and origin of FreeMix Radio, the original mixtape radio show. Let me again say from the outset that FreeMix Radio is an actual mixtape distributed freely in and around Washington, D.C., but also other parts of the country and world. We are continuing the traditions of the rap music mixtape, emancipatory journalism, and black radical underground communication and radio. Our goal is to make the mixtape a 21st century version of David Walker's Appeal or Robert and Mabel Williams' Radio Free Dixie and the many other forms of radical journalism whose goal was and is the provision of necessary information and culture to inspire, encourage, and even direct political struggle. For a more detailed explanation of all this, feel free to visit voxunion.com, where you can pick up a copy of the first academic study of the mixtape as emancipatory journalism. In short, with FreeMix Radio, the mixtape actually becomes the airwaves of sorts used to convey the kinds of journalism and culture that commercial outlets cannot offer. This is done because we recognize that, as in all societies, dominant media work for the dominant, and that the media system of today in the United States is the most powerful and all-pervasive system in human history. That means fewer people are able to control more of what we see, read, and hear, all of which leads to their ability to constrain our consciousness and ultimately our behavior. In terms of hip hop and all music in general, 4 companies own and distribute roughly 95% of all the music in the Western world. As of July 21st, 2006, Sony BMG is looking to sell its music division, possibly to Universal or EMI, which is itself looking to merge with Time Warner, meaning that we may soon be down to 2 companies with this kind
I
of
mix
control.
what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.
All right. Yes, indeed. Right back at you here. Welcome back, everybody. Please do like, share, subscribe. Put this in your socials. Comment. Support the platform. Again, I'll put the link to that video in the show description, or you can just rewind at some point if you want to revisit it. But yeah, anyway, so as we proceed here with chapter 14, this chapter, as I said earlier, caused me some issues. I remember the publisher that I was working with at the time, the editor, she said to me at one point, you know, you sure you want to include this chapter? Because she said something to the effect that a lot of your target audience will be offended by it. And one, I had to remind her that white liberals and white people in general were not my target audience, happily invited to read and comment, critique, etc. But they were not my target audience. But that secondly, I did hope that the response would have been different. Now, part of it is, again, as I said, that maybe it's the flaws in the presentation of the book, and maybe even in this argument that made it less attractive. I suspect that there is no form of the argument that would have been successful, because as I cite here, there were so many, and to this day, we just talked about in Saturdays with Renee, and the article we just read around body cams, written by, I'm not gonna speculate on his background, but my point is that it had a healthy critique of white liberalism. So it wasn't, and I thought it was relevant because part of what my project was talking about was that the internal colony, that is Black people in this case specifically, and I'll just skip very quick, I'll come back. No one is coming, and for the colonized, no one is coming. So the point is that even in spaces where we should look to find some solidarity, there's some major flaws. So just getting to the epigraphs here, for the vast majority of white Americans the past decade, the first phase had been a struggle to treat the Negro with a degree of decency, not of equality. White America was ready to demand that the Negro should be spared the lash of brutality and coarse degradation, but it had never been truly committed to helping him out of poverty, exploitation, or all forms of discrimination. The outraged white citizen had been sincere when he snatched the whips from the Southern sheriffs and forbade them more cruelties. But when this was to a degree accomplished, the emotions that had momentarily inflamed him melted away. White Americans left the Negro on the ground and in devastating numbers walked off with the aggressor. It appeared that white segregationists and the ordinary white citizen had more in common with one another than either had with the Negro. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Many people want to know why, out of the entire white segment of society, we want to criticize the liberals. We have to criticize them because they represent the liaison between both groups, between the oppressed and the oppressor. The liberal tries to become an arbitrator, but he is incapable of solving the problems. He promises the oppressor that he can keep the oppressed under control, that he will stop them from becoming illegal. In this case, illegal means violent. At the same time, he promises the oppressed that he will be able to alleviate their suffering in due time. Historically, of course, we know this is impossible, and our era will not escape history, Kwame Ture, and neither will ours. So my point in this chapter was that, look, I watched Democracy Now! I read and pay attention to Project Censored. I watched Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting. I listened and watched to, at the time, Media Matters with Bob McChesney. And there were major flaws as it relates specifically to Black people in the United States. So as I noted here, and I even did a little study at the time, I know for a fact one of Democracy Now!'s producers read it, and I know for a fact he was dismissive of it, but not because of its accuracy or its methodology, but because of its conclusions. So as I wrote here, similar trends, and I don't know if they've evolved. I don't know. I don't watch anymore, to be perfectly honest. Similar trends exist across the leading white left media outlets, including Democracy Now! Host Amy Goodman cites as inspiration Pan-Africanist thinkers and Black activists, but rarely devotes her daily national broadcast to the issues facing Black, Latino, or Indigenous people. In prior research conducted on the subject, it was noted that of the 176 possible shows weekdays for the calendar year of 2005, prior to the levee flooding following Hurricane Katrina, only 21 or 12% had a focus on Black America. Of that small number, 10 were historical references to the civil rights era, with 2 about Emmett Till. 4 of the 21 had Damu Smith as guest, and only 4 shows were about some contemporary issue. And shout out to my late great, at one time, Jegna, Damu Smith, Black Voices for Peace in Washington, D.C., who gave me a bar at one point. He said, as he was in a cab with his daughter, the cab driver said, "Oh, so this is daddy-daughter day?" And he said, "No." He said, "I'm raising my child." Oh, my camera. In other words, he rejected, sorry about that, everybody. He rejected that notion that it's daddy-daughter day, or, you know, it's like, or daddy daycare. That was the line. Daddy daycare. It's not daddy daycare. I'm raising my daughter. What you talking about? And I used that one line years later. Somebody saw me with my children and said, "Oh, it's daddy daycare." I said, no. I'm raising my children. What is this? I'm with my daughters. What you talking about? This is not daddy daycare. This is daddy every day. This is daddy doing his thing. Like, so but shout out. But I pointed this out in the book at the time because that Organized Community of United People was a group of us at the time, young wannabe revolutionaries who broke away from Black Voices for Peace. And in a conversation with Dabu, I told him, we want to break because your group is too liberal. And he said, good. He said, be the SNCC to our SCLC. And without irony, like, he was serious. He was like, I support you. I got you. I get it. Go do it. He also gave me another little bit of advice too. He said, don't get too hung up on some of the initial arguments and discussions in forming an organization or an effort, because the people who are going to do the work are going to end up doing the work anyway. Something to that effect. It was. So that was the point there. And then I noted here, and this came up, even this, some of my own maybe PTSD around this came up, and I was called to task for making a similar point incorrectly, apparently, about that podcast Mac and Cheese, or Mac what is it, Mac and whatever, where I kept saying, like, it seemed like at one point it was this thing that I saw at the time happening with McChesney and others, where people will make reference to Black journalists and scholars but not invite them on, specifically when it comes to Glenn Ford. So McChesney did the same. At one point was talking about Glenn Ford multiple weeks in a row, and I'm like, and I reached out and was like, the man is here, go invite him on the program. And then even with Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting, when I at a media reform conference ran into Janine Jackson, shout out to her and her great work, the sister that works with FAIR. But I asked her about what's up, basically, where are all these stories that face Black people? And her response was, well, help us out, send us stories. And then I said, and then when asked about what appears to be a preference for stories about Palestinians or the so-called Middle East in general, the response was, well, we're at war. All well and good, but this, of course, presupposes that wars on poverty, drugs, racial inequality, homelessness, or police brutality, mass incarceration are over. So I was, again, not saying we shouldn't be talking about Palestine. I'm just saying you all talk way more about Palestine than you do about Black people here. And I did find that to be worthy of some critique. Now, at the time, I was naive into thinking, much as I think I am still to this day naive about this issue, that if you offer principled criticism respectfully, that this should lead to discussion and not isolation. But, you know. So I did say, and I thought at the time that in a media sense, the white left have realized their political equivalent, by inhabiting the role once defined by Kwame Ture, the least powerful element in white America. Politically, their role is to stem the potential for Black or other violent rebellion. In terms of media, their role is to limit violent reclamation of media space, practice, and focus, which is sort of the way I was trying to work in some of my politics in a way that I thought would be publishable and not lead to my arrest. Anyway, there's some critique in here of Eve Ensler at the time, the media reform movement, which I was following and somewhat involved with at the time. And the long story short was that for the colonized, no one is coming. The colonized have to produce their own liberatory efforts, including media and journalistically. So in conclusion, this concept of changing people's minds in the context of a reactionary scheme is very difficult. We are bombarded by incredible amounts of propaganda. That's what it is. That includes some of the hip hop movement, not the movement because it's not a movement. I'm not talking about the bitches and hoes. I'm talking about these totally reactionary things. I'm talking about the language. I'm not talking about the language. I'm not talking about the Don Imus piece. I'm talking about the fact that you have Russell Simmons out here totally involved in some very reactionary activity and at the height of the game. And we know that it's Sony and all these others. So the people who do have something to say within this certain cultural paradigm of hip hop are obviously not going to get into mass mind because they are not in control of the mass media. So the problem is that we're not in control of any of this. We've got to create the conditions to get to the people's minds. We have no means by which to pound the population of this country with information, whether it's through music or whether it's through rhetoric. The concrete conditions are not there for us to do that. We've got to find ways to get enough resources and have bigger voices to get out to the people so the people can have some new ideas about what they might want to do. Elaine Brown. When one says terrorism in a democratic society, one also says media. For terrorism, by its very nature, is a psychological weapon which depends upon communicating a threat to a wider society. This, in essence, is why terrorism and the media enjoy a symbiotic relationship. Paul Wilkinson. So ultimately, those two epigraphs, those quotes and epigraph summarize everything I was trying to say in the book and in the chat and in this conclusion. And it's even more intensified today. And I get the contradiction of me saying this on YouTube. But we are absolutely lacking the material capability to project to a mass audience our politics. This is why I've always agreed with Glenn Ford's approach to this. Our effort should not be to reach a mass audience. Our effort should be to reach those who will build the organizations and the movements that will impact mass audiences and communities. That's the only way we have a chance here. So I was even talking about the small endeavor of an analog developed mixtape performing that function or aiding that effort, being part of the history of a dissonant and underground press that did historically lead to the development and emergence of radical efforts. I make the point here to cite Ward Churchill in concluding the argument that this is also about genocide here. He cites the United Nations 1947 definition of what are national and oppressed groups and what defines genocide as it relates to those groups. And every one of them applies, I think, and have argued, to Black America. So it may not be per se although it is at times, I think, works on this level, a biological genocide. There is certainly this process of slow death measures and the subjection to conditions of life, which owing to a lack of proper housing, clothing, food, hygiene, and medical care, excessive work or physical exertion are likely to result in the debilitation and dearth of individuals. There is also this issue of the cultural genocide, which I said here speaks to the immediate topic. The imposition of an alien national pattern, which includes all policies aimed at destroying the specific characteristics by which a target group is defined or defines itself, thereby forcing them to become something else. I would argue that's happening to the mixed race category right now. You not black anymore, you mix. Redefine yourself, become something else, destroying specific characteristics by which the target group has been defined. But that certainly happens as it relates to Black America. So I was just saying that why not try a mixtape? More importantly, it doesn't matter whether you're making mixtapes. It is understanding this colonized relationship, and that the mixtape evolving out of colonial antagonisms asks for no permission, is bound by no laws of the state, and disseminates a national mythology essential to all national groupings. Mixtapes are freedom incarnate and can and must be used to support efforts whose goals are the same, more freedom. Whether it's mixtapes or any other form of expression, that should be the goal. The problems facing the colonized can only be addressed at the point when they determine through organization that their conditions must change and in ways they define. That piece, the piece that is the promise of such organized struggle, is, as Fred Hampton said, the reward of those who fight for it. The fight can be buttressed by turning off the radio and sticking a fucking mixtape radio in instead. And that's the book. That's the argument. That's it. So please, as you are liking, sharing, subscribing, and doing all those things, if you want to see more, you can get the book for free. The link is in the show description. Flaws and all. I do think it is a nice contribution to a commemoration of Black August. The book has always, as I said at the beginning, been dedicated to political prisoners. The whatever money was made went to political prisoners. It is meant to carry that spirit that produces political prisoners. And I loved what I was trying to do. I really do. It again, flaws and all. So now I got a couple minutes if you all do, and you have, questions, comments, queries, conundrums, catechisms. I'll scroll through some of the chat and see if, otherwise, please do make sure you have the bell rung so you don't miss all the forthcoming shows. Remix tomorrow. Daruba's going to join me after the remix to talk about, well, at least in the context of Gerald Horne's new book, Unarmed Struggle. Who was on your committee? Where were they? The people you already knew, or did you reach out to them and ask them to join your committee? So Dr. Catherine McAdams was the chair of my committee, and she was great. I will, I get the contradiction, but she and Maureen Beasley, these two white Southern women, boy, I tell you, patriarchy worked on them to the point where they were like, I'm down with Black Armstrong. No, I'm just playing. They were not. But they were like, go forth, young man, produce. So she was on it. The late Dr. Ron Walters was on it. And shout out to him. He was at least always supportive and very clear that we do not agree. And when I wore my Bob Marley shirt, I'll never forget this either. When I wore my Bob Marley shirt, I had a nice black, long sleeve, black Bob Marley, beautiful picture of Bob on it shirt that I always thought was like my nice dress up shirt. And I wore it to my dissertation defense, and he commented on it. He was like, that's what we doing? as he showed up in his suit and tie and all of that. You know what? I think, if I remember correctly, technically Chuck D was on my dissertation committee. He never did anything, but I think he was technically supposed to be on it as an outside something. At this point, I'm glad there wasn't too much of that, because who else was on my committee though? I'm forgetting. No, I can't remember who else was on my committee. Gurevich. Damn, I'm getting old. All these folks are gone. Michael Gurevich was on my committee. Jewish sociologist from England. Brilliant dude. Fair dude, but did not want to talk about Israel. I asked him one day, can we talk about Israel and Palestine? He said no. Straight out no. Who else? And I had to tell, I remember I had to write Gurevich an email at one point, because after you do your dissertation defense, I pass the defense, you get a couple weeks to do revisions. And there was too much of a back and forth. And I did kind of have to put my foot down and say, look, man, like, we don't have to agree, but I've met the requirements here. It's time to go. Yeah, exactly. Chuck D's current relationships would make that a little more, but at one point that was yeah. Uh-oh, what happened? My folks emailed you 3 weeks ago about Black Teacher Block Party, August 24th. No, I did not see that. I will look for that. Please ask them to send me another one. Good people, if I don't respond to you to an email, it is not on purpose, or rarely is it on purpose. So please resend it, or I'll try to find it. But I definitely did not see that. August 24th in DC. No, I did not see that. That sounds dope though. Hey, thanks for downloading it. Shouldn't it be easier to re-engage which process? Would it be easier to re-engage? Yeah, Blinken's homeboy. Yeah, Chuck, man, I don't know, man. I don't know, man. We just don't agree. That's it. That's all. That's it. That's all. But okay, yeah, I don't know, let's see. Yeah, I hear you, Ray. I appreciate you coming through this chapter. I just articulated why I left TYT for now BLM. Yeah, I although I do like the T Sports show a little bit. What's his name that does that? I like that. Definitely rest in peace, rest in power to Glenn Ford. Michael Mixon Moore. Wow, that's a hell of a name. Is that right? Is that what? I never heard of him. That's a good name, though. That's a great name, though. A fun show for August should be a look into the formation of NABL, created August 24th, a million years ago. What is NABL? What's NABL? My bad if I messed up your joke. Oh, the creation of a mixtape would be easier now. Yeah, I mean, the creation was really never the problem. It's the distribution that's it's always the issue of distribution. So even now digitally, people still struggle to be heard digitally, to get their SoundClouds heard or their DAT Piffs or whatever, if that's still going. So it's and that's the point about Spotify and everything else. In that article that that I briefly referenced on Spotify, I mean, it was about Spotify is just showing how they've just created more intensified choke points at the point of distribution. So yeah, it's easier to create everything at this point. Movies, everything. People are creating movies on their iPhones, but oh right, the National Negro National Negro Association Business League. That's right. What's her name? And so Booker T, and then I was just at a conference where a sister was doing research on Madam C.J. Walker, and admittedly, this research was more glorifying of Walker than I would have appreciated. But the point was that she was apparently trying to do something more. I forgot what it was that she was trying to do with she was trying to do something more around political organizing, probably around the vote with the business league than Booker T wanted her to do. And they had a falling out about that, apparently. I mentioned them briefly in my buying power work as promoting that, being an early proponent of that myth. But yeah, I hear you. They're another Black August formation. Wow, that's deep. The book, I think I do briefly mention in the book, does the book reference Dat Piff or physical mix? It does. It references it. I think I referenced Dat Piff. If maybe not. But there's only a passing reference to the move online of mixtapes. And yeah, but I don't think I mentioned Dat Piff in particular, it looks like. So but part of, I actually don't remember exactly how I addressed this, but part of the argument was that the digital media space is going to become is not going to be the free and easy space to use to produce any, and it's kind of like what we're seeing now. We were seeing the beginnings of back in the early 2000s. The internet was never going to be meant to be some space for free and equal exchange where everything can be freely and equally found. So as soon as the industry started to catch up to the new technology, they started to lock down everything through copyright in music and elsewhere. That's why, again, the story of Aaron Swartz, I think, is so important, because ultimately what got him in so much trouble was over the copyright of controlling the intellectual property of scholars and the intellectual and scientific community. And if you're going to take money away from JSTOR and universities and redistribute freely the research that the public end up contributing to anyway, you're going to get punished. So I was arguing then that this idea, because people were telling me, and they were right in a sense, that the traditional mixtape is going to get destroyed, but they were wrong in saying that because the internet is such a better version of it, and will make more room for more people to do more, to be heard. And I'm not, and I was right. I and whoever else was, and those I was citing were right, that no, it's not. It's going to become more of a difficult space and more easy to omit and marginalize. So part of what I was arguing was that the physical mixtape was meant to kind of maintain analog physical ties to the community and create space for the community. So yeah. No, I have not been watching the Olympics. I've been seeing some of the highlights, particularly for world football, but I haven't been watching. I can't. It's very difficult for me to. I did watch an interview last night where Michael Johnson talked about, and I never knew this, that he gave back one of his 5 gold medals because one of his teammates on the relay team admitted to using PEDs, and out of disgust, Michael Johnson gave back his medal. But that's as much as I've been paying attention. You know. And I referenced Zizek in the book, not making that exact point, but where he said apparently that that intellectual property would be the biggest problem of the 21st century besides climate change. But he would be right. So much of what we see almost on a daily basis, even with this platform, is around copyright, fair use, which is, and I wonder what this legal clinic case or study would say about, or what would be updated in the laws around fair use today, because intellectual property, and that was one of the points I was making in the book. Intellectual property is a massive industry, and a massive industry in manipulating public opinion. You know what? I've not seen too much about this. I saw that Algerian boxer who hit that white woman so hard that she cried and accused her of being a man. I love your summary of it. That's my favorite summary I've seen so far. I watched one video where a medical doctor broke down the science and clarifying that this was not, as some were reporting, a transgendered woman, that this was a female whose testosterone levels had been tested above what those are, and that this medical doctor was breaking down the continuum we're all on. You know, that whole thing of we all are born starting basically with the Y, and then you know, with only some of us having the potential through the X to become male. But there's a continuum. It's not like in every case you're either one quote or the other quote. There is a continuum based on your testosterone and other levels and what you're born with and how you're born and all of that. And then ultimately, then there's another part about how you feel about your relationship to your identification, and that there's a biological component to that apparently is evolving in terms of research and study, that it's not just a social construct. There is a biological component to how one identifies in relationship to their imposed identity. So now that's the extent of what I think I understand about all of this. But I like Chitty Matcha's summary. And Chitty Matcha, you be in these Twitter spaces crazy. I didn't realize that. I try to peep in everyone, but your homeboy be in these arguments. But yeah. So, but I like that summary. She got hit so hard that she cried and said, "Nah, that's a man." But as a soccer parent, I have at times been guilty of a version of that. I have seen a couple of them kids on the other team, and I'm like, not questioning so much the gender, but the age. You 14? That's a 15-year-old. But yeah, no, that's funny. That's funny. I'm not in these spaces. Oh, no. Every once in a while, I'll just be on Twitter and I see Chitty Matcha is in a space, or I get that notification telling me Chitty Matcha's in a space. And I check out the space, and it's been a couple times, it's been this dude that hosts these debates around religion and I don't like arguing, but he's willing to argue with the broader European world. I'm not interested in that. I can't do that. No, I've never spoken to Greg Diggs. No, Sorry, I don't know. Oh wow, on WPGC at the first mix show. No, I've never spoken to him. Never. So much racism, sure, as the tiny Chinese team. Oh, I'm sure. Yeah, yeah. Nothing like world competition in sport to bring out racism. MF and God Orange Peel Beef. I'd love to know what all that means. There are a lot of YouTube channels that use copyrighted clips from film, television, and music, and they are some of the bigger channels on YouTube. Why don't they get strikes? So there's a few ways I've learned that you avoid strikes. One, you don't monetize the video. So one way potentially around it is you don't monetize the video. You can't monetize the video, or only the copyright holders benefit from the monetization of the video. And that's why a lot of those videos have sponsors or are made through after heavy Patreon support or something like that, because they can't make money off of it. Others, and there's a lot of them that struggle. I've even seen some of the bigger channels struggle. My favorite is the brother in LA that does the Birdman channel, the critique of CinemaSins. And he's talked about this a couple times, that you're not really sure how much is going to be considered under fair use or not. So you'll sometimes see that they edit in some other things because there's like a time limit or something, and they have to go back and re-upload the video. And they're often not doing a live like I am here. They're not doing it live. It's edited, and then they see if they get by the censors. Yeah, those are the only ways I've been able to see them get away with it. If you think CinemaSins is funny, you should watch the Birdman channel, the Birdman 3 or something like that, because his critiques of their videos, not only is that is a brother doing it, so it's pretty fun, it's cool. Even though he disagreed, he shouted out ADOS in a video, and I put a comment and he responded, but he didn't agree with my critique. I was like, everybody has blind spots, but that notwithstanding, I'll show you his channel here just so everybody's clear what I'm talking about. I think his critiques of CinemaSins are not only accurate, because they have a lot of flaws and blind spots, but so it's this guy's channel here, the with the 3 Birdman. So if you are not familiar, and he's got a pretty big channel here, relatively speaking, it's not the million or whatever that CinemaSins has, but first of all, and his videos are very well produced. The audio, the video is immaculate, and I think his analysis and his critique of people's critiques of films is right and funny. And he's an atheist, which is, so like I said, I really enjoy that too. The ADOS part notwithstanding, but what can you do? And he loves going to Japan, so he seems to love. I was like, so you have no problem with internationalism, so what's up with Pan African, whatever. The plague, son, it's the plague. I'm trying to tell you. That's why we just do soda here. We try to drink our soda. Try to drink that soda, but it's difficult. So, but okay, everybody, I appreciate you for hanging out this morning. If there are no pressing questions or comments, critiques, queries, contradictions, conundrums, I'm not sure what he was. It was a passing reference. It was like, it wasn't even that big. It was like, I don't remember, but it was something where he was clearly, and it led me to comment, and I just said, love your channel, love everything you're doing, just please, check into that. And then he wrote back, and I wrote back, and then he was like, nah, I'm good. By the way, I did hear from Cornell West yesterday. He may be around here next month. We'll see. Hey, I appreciate you, B Modular. Salute back at you, man. And peace to you, Anthony. All right, everybody. Big thanks. And thanks again, Chidi Macha, for suggesting that I do this. I hope it is of some benefit. I will timestamp it over the next day or so to help out people to navigate and through it. Again, I just, big shout out to me for what I attempted here. Maybe not so much the execution, needed some work. But flaws notwithstanding, I think the argument is of great value. It's definitely original. I haven't seen anybody try to do it. And by the way, I think, you know what? I did forget to do something. There's two things I forgot to do. One, so let me just, I'll just do this real quick since I had already prepared to do it. Dang, I knew. Yeah. So one thing I just found in terms of contemporary discussion, there was a documentary that came out on somewhere on one of these platforms about the history of the mixtape, and I couldn't even get through it. It was so disturbing because it was just another regurgitation of the same commercial fantasy that the mixtape, it's just like the hip hop fantasy started from the gutter. And now we here. It's like and they leave out all the context, all the unsanctioned, all the politics we discussed here. They left out all the stuff about how corporations co-opted the mixtape and turned it into a promotional tool. They left out all of that kind of stuff. But and another example of that was in this story where you might recognize some of it graphically. From Wired magazine last year, last August, in fact, how mixtapes remixed music history and its future. And it's another kind of, so they're correct in saying today, whether it's Spotify, Apple Music, or YouTube, the playlist is the thing. But until 20 years ago, it was the mixtapes. They're right in saying mixtapes have been foundational. They're right to talk about the very grassroots community based of it. They cite a professor I'm not familiar with, Charles Carson, a professor of musicology at the University of Texas, Texas at Austin. Mixtape culture is really about access, and what it means. That means is voice, he said, like being able to be heard in some type of context that you normally don't have access to. That's you speaking with the community about the stuff the community values and giving it back to them. So again, he's on the right track here, but whether through it's the editing or maybe his own focus in his work, I don't know him. The politics and the history of the mixtape kind of get lost in again, that sort of DIY nature from the gutter. Now we're here story that and this sort of apoliticized or depoliticized discussion of having a voice and presenting something differently, if not vocally, politically, sonically. They talk about the more popular attacks through the FBI and copyright law enforcement of DJ Drama and Lil Wayne. But again, only in the context of the RIAA defending its copyrighted material and its resourced, stolen, resource extracted material. It's not in that context. So as Carson does rightly note here, at least passingly, that you could argue that the overall net effect of the mixtape culture was benefiting the music industry because people would be listening to pirated music and then following that an artist. So and then when the major label debut happens, they're lining up around the corner to buy the album. Again, that's true, but I think more importantly than that is not that they're just using it as a street team promotional marketing tool, which of course they did to co-opt the mixtape primarily through DJ Clue, who used to hang out outside of the record labels to get that early release, and where they were based, and he's using it to promote himself, but they're using it to promote their work for free. Tens and thousands, hundreds of thousands of mixtapes distributed all over the East Coast and beyond, promoting for free. But what they leave out is that this allows for the suppressive element. That there's the dialectic here. You're not only promoting yourself, but you're suppressing someone else. You're still managing public opinion. Who are these corporations? What are they connected to? Some of the arguments I make in my work are just not incorporated in these more popular discussions. So it's like they didn't take it serious. It's a microcosm of the hip hop story. They didn't take it seriously, then they had to take it seriously, then they co-opted it, and now it's an important. So my point was in highlighting that article was that they're still regurgitating the flaws. So in talking about why my work would still be relevant all these years later, there it is, because the mixtape is still being discussed in terms of its relationship to hip hop, which is specific to the mixtape form I'm talking about. Not all mixtapes, of course, but not with the appropriate political lens. The political context is erased, and the revolutionary nature of the history is erased, and the colonial takeover is erased. So that's what I left out. Oh no, I didn't catch the Two Americas doc. What was that? Where is that? What's the question? Well, where is the question? What's the question? What's up, Josh? Appreciate you. Thank you, Chitty Mancha. What question did I miss? Please. Oh no. Somebody restated it. Wait, independent platforms being self-hosted video streaming platforms, podcasts, social media platforms, that this stuff has been made easier to do. I don't think that was the question. Okay, given your assessment of the commercial internet being largely a captured environment, do you think there's still a valuable to creating independent self-hosted platforms on locally controlled servers? I mean, this is something we've discussed here too. So the short answer is yes. I do think there's value in self-hosted platforms, locally controlled. The conundrum, of course, the paradox is, how do you reach an audience? Because the audience is over here. Even the limited audience that I think I'm again in line with Glenn Ford's argument, trying to reach, that is an activist, academic, journalistic, artistic community that has a certain politics that it wants to expand and needs a certain content or can benefit from a certain content or a public sphere of its own. So, I mean, ideally, theoretically, it'd be great if all of us, quote unquote, were off of all of this and in some other space where we could perform these same kinds of functions more or less as easily, but without the oversight of the state and advertisers. Yes, definitely check out the new Brokish. And that's and the whole point of this platform was supposed to be to try to do that in this space. And it's not easy. It's not easy, but that was the point here, to create a little corner, not with the mythology that we're somehow competing with or destroying the mainstream, not without recognizing we're still benefiting YouTube and Google, but to say, hey, we have an audience. Now, if we create this alternative and can use this to bring people over there, that would be even better. But yeah, shout out to Ron G and those blend tapes. Used to love those things. So, all right, everybody. Look, I really appreciate all of you. Please do all the things that audiences can do. And I'll see you tomorrow, probably with the remix and again with the Ruba, lot tomorrow. And then all week with the remix. The new Brokish dropped. Sundays last night was dope. Check out everything. Ring the bell. Make sure you don't miss anything. And again, peace if you're willing to fight for it, like Fred Hampton used to say. And I'll catch you again next time. Right here on
I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like. I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.
What do you sacrifice?
Calm, kindness, kinship, love. I've given up all chance at inner peace. I made my mind a sunless space. I share my dreams with ghosts. I wake up every day to an equation I wrote 15 years ago for which there's only one conclusion. I'm damned for what I do. My anger, my ego, my unwillingness to yield, my eagerness to fight has set me on a path from which there's no escape. I yearn to be a savior against injustice without contemplating the cost, and by the time I look down, there's no longer any ground beneath my feet. What is my sacrifice? I'm condemned to use the tools of my enemy to defeat them. I burn my decency for someone else's future. I burn my life to make a sunrise that I know I'll never see. Now, the ego that started this fight will never have a mirror or an audience or the light of gratitude. So what do I sacrifice? Everything, 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 everything.
I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.